Welcome to Let's Be Well Together podcast. We're your wellness check-in team. Join us each week or when you can. We enjoy exploring wellness concepts and reminding you to make time for wellness.
This is episode 85.
And here we are with a new episode of Let's Be Well Together podcast. This is Elise Seifert, and I'm joined today by John Webster. Hi, John.
Hey, Elise.
So you sent me an article that kind of connected to something we've talked about before, which is the blue zone. And we had mentioned that the blue zone are areas in the world in which people live for a long period of time. Would you like to tell us more about the article, John?
Yeah, I would. And I agree. I'm really intrigued by blue zones. I really love this idea of instead of just using theory to think about nutrition and stuff and science and chemistry to tell people how they'll live longer. I really like the idea of going and seeing how people actually do live longer, who do live longer. It just seems so intuitive. This article was written by Renee Onque, O-N-Q-U-E. It was published on June 3rd, 2023, and it's called People Who Live Longest Share These Two Traits, say authors who study Japanese secret for a long and happy life. And she talks about a book. It's a very short article. She talks about a book called Ikigai, I-K-I-G-A-I, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life, written by Hector Garcia and Francesc Miralles. Most centurions, people at or near the age of 100, have similar personality traits that may have helped increase their lifespan, according to a 2012 study cited in the book. The research was conducted at Yeshiva University and analyzed the characteristics of nearly 250 centenarians based on self-reports and other people's accounts of them. So this is intriguing to me. Let's talk about these two. Well, let's say what the two features are and then talk about each one. And the two attributes that they share are first, a positive attitude, and second, a high degree of emotional awareness. Not something you'd think of. If you said, what makes people live to 100, you would have thought it's something else.
I would have thought it was more of a healthy lifestyle.
Right.
And the article does say that in addition to eating well and moving your body, these are the attributes that help you to live a long and healthy life.
It's more than just what you eat and what you do. It's how you think and how you approach life.
Which I really like learning about.
So what stood out to me about a positive attitude, I want to jump down. They have 3 bullet points. They say that positive attitudes could kind of typically refer to these 3 things: optimistic, easygoing, and extroverted. What I want to say about that is that's not really me. I'm trying to be a little more extroverted. I'm more of an introvert, but I'm trying to be more extroverted. I think I am relatively easygoing at times, and I've become optimistic, but that's not who I was. And then I came to this thinking that it's a choice. Mm-hmm. I can choose. There's some things I can choose to do, and I can choose to be optimistic. Instead of waiting for bad things to happen, some years ago, I thought, no, I'm going to choose to be optimistic. That's how I'm going to approach life. I wasn't so much focused on the other 2 bullets. And what I can say is, in my own experience, I have felt a lot better in all kinds of areas, having chosen optimism.
That's amazing. I know I myself am naturally an optimistic person, so I think that's a big help for me. But I know when I worry about something that I can't control, I really have to make a choice to make sure I don't worry about it. I think that's not my problem. I can't fix that. And I think that's when I become more pessimistic, is when it's something that's out of my control. And maybe that's just because I'm the kind of person who likes to be in control. So I think that's a choice I have to make. And I know when I'm in that time where I'm being pessimistic or I'm thinking about something that I don't like, that I can't control, it makes my whole body feel down. And it almost feels like I can feel my blood rushing through my body more, like it's raising my blood pressure almost. So I know my optimism, when I choose to let go of the things I can't control, it just helps to make my body feel calmer as a whole.
I think pessimism in that context, I'll be honest, it's a really kind of crummy time in human history. If you ask me, there's just so much negativity out there. And it almost feels like there's no hope that it would turn around if I think about it in that context. And so I do find myself going down that rabbit hole sometimes. Like I see what's happening and I just don't see any outcome that's going to be a good one.
No.
But I can't focus on that. And I do find that if I think, well, wait a minute, there can be positive outcomes. We shouldn't just give up. We shouldn't stop trying to make our world a better place. Then I can start to think, yes, it's possible. It's going to be difficult. A lot of people will have to work together. But that optimistic feeling helps me overcome that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness.
Right. And are there any strategies that you have to employ in order to find that optimism? Or is it just a conscious choice that you have to make in your thinking?
Well, actually, what I tend to do, so right now, for example, a lot of it's driven by the political situation, especially in the States and the war in the Ukraine and all that stuff. The strategy that's been working for me lately is I start to think about people who I know are working to make the world a better place. I start to think about what they're doing and what they're giving and the energy they have and the positive attitudes that they have. And I remember how amazing people are. And then I think, yeah, okay, we can make this work.
Amazing. That's a great strategy. I know I often go towards breathing strategies that I've picked up on doing different yoga training courses. So I know that breathing helps me to let go of those thoughts.
Nice. So basically you're trying to get rid of them as opposed to like turn them in a different direction.
Yes, but I like the way that you're turning them into positivity.
Right.
Yeah, I like to think that when you send out the positivity, it helps those who are helping others. But I know I often think about maybe like a balloon. So I fill the balloon with those thoughts. And then as I breathe out, I let the balloon go.
Nice.
And I find that just helps to give me almost a weightlessness.
Yeah, and that kind of thing I'm just talking about ties into one of the first points they make about positive attitude too, which is prioritizing peace and happiness. Now, I personally find happiness to be a difficult concept to understand. And I actually don't like it very much, because the reason I don't like it is because I think I used to be really happy, but I was using it to mask problems and not face problems, because I just like, oh, I'm laughing, I'm happy, everything's good, I have a great family life, and I didn't address issues. So I try and focus more on more practical things, but peace I can get my head around. You know, I can think that if you're trying, to me, peace isn't the absence of war. Peace is trying to achieve balance and harmony, which of course we talk about all the time. And I can see how if you're trying to have a peaceful approach to life, you're trying to find that balance and a calmness and being at one with the people around you and yourself, I can imagine how that could really contribute to helping you live longer and healthier.
And it also talks about laughter and how important laughter is in your life, which I think we really undervalue sometimes.
Which is one of the reasons I have comedians on the show regularly. I think laughter is so important.
So important.
And again, everything comes back to my own experiences. I just know that laughter is like a medicine for me to so many different painful aspects of life and even physical pain. I love to laugh.
Love it.
I think that was the one that we'll focused on just because of time. But the next one too, the next one threw me for a loop. It's the high degree of emotional awareness. Here's why it threw me for a loop. I thought that would have meant what we talk about a lot is self-awareness, trying to understand yourself. But this is talking about both that, knowing how you feel, but also communicating it to other people.
That's right. And I thought it was kind of contradictory to the first point, because I've always been the kind of person who wants to please others. So I think I've always had this positive attitude and it makes people happy. So I think in order to please other people, I have to be happy.
Right.
And I can't let them see that I'm mad or sad. Whereas this article talks about how it's important to communicate how you're feeling to others around them. But for me, I thought, how am I supposed to be positive and have this optimism when I'm telling people that I'm mad or I'm sad? So I think understanding how to express my emotions in a healthy way is really the important part of this article.
If I love reading these articles and having these discussions, we're learning so much. I wouldn't have thought this either. And it specifically says that they don't bottle up their emotions. They make an effort to communicate how they feel. And I'm terrible at that. And for me, I mean, it kind of sounds silly because I do a podcast, but I'm an introvert. I don't like talking about myself. I don't like telling people how I feel, which I often don't on the show. I sometimes do, but I'm working hard to try and turn that around. Not for this reason, but I guess if I think about it, I have been feeling better that I'm expressing these things. So for me, I mostly do it because I want people to get used to sharing their emotions and feelings so that we don't have the stigma that's attached with it, so that we can be more authentic with each other. But I love your point too, which is, you have this mask. You don't want other people to see what's behind it. But for your own health, it's worth it for you to start doing that a bit more. And I think you can trust the people.
Yes. And I think
I'm saying that to myself too. I can't really believe it, but I think I can trust people.
Yeah. I think I am lucky to have some really strong relationships with friends and my partner and my family. So I think it's important to remember that. That's a good reminder that I could trust those around me.
The other thing, just before we finish off, I do like this other point, and I have tried to incorporate that, which is expressing your emotion is a healthy way that can benefit relationships. For me, with a relationship with Sheila, or also family relationships and other relationships, I have found over the years that yes, it's much better to not bottle things up, but to talk about things, and that really enriches the relationships. To finish off, they do say at the end that they still don't know what the cause and effect relationship is. And I just want to point that out because like so many of our discussions on the podcast, we're just talking about stuff. We don't know if it will work, but why not try some of these things and see if it helps you in your life?
Love it.
Guests are giving their time, expanding our minds. Today's interview is in the category of mental wellness. Jodi Skeates' life changed in an instant in 2017. Her husband Scott was enjoying a hobby he loved, scuba diving. He suffered an anoxic brain injury from which he did not recover. Jodi struggled and eventually found support and understanding through an organization called Soaring at an event called Camp Widow in 2019. We're doing 2 interviews with Jodi. In the first, she tells us about how she recovered from such a traumatic loss. And in the next, we'll talk about how Jodi is putting her lessons into action to help others and to treasure every moment. Welcome, Jodi.
Thank you, John. Pleasure to be here.
Over her career, Jodi has provided legal support to the life and health insurance industry. She has served as in-house senior counsel for several Canadian financial institutions, as well as the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association. As a government lobbyist, she's represented the industry on timely issues such as privacy, genetic testing, medical assistance in dying, gender identity, and expression discrimination. Jodi retired from full-time in-house legal practice earlier this year and is now working part-time as a litigator with Fasken, a large Canadian law firm with offices across the country and affiliations with firms around the world. And it just so happened to be where I started my career, Jodi.
I did not know that.
She lives in Burlington, Ontario. Jodi is a founding director and chair of the board of directors of Soaring Canada and serves as secretary to the board of directors of the Niagara Grape and Wine Festival. And Jodi, I was struck by a LinkedIn post that you put up about 5 months ago. You spoke about retiring from full-time in-house legal practice at the age of 52, after you recognized that life is fragile, precious, and all too short. If you could, I'm going to ask you to start by telling us a bit about Scott and your relationship.
Thanks, John. Scott and I met later in life. We had both had what we called starter marriages in our 20s. And by the time we met, we had sort of fully evolved into the people that we were going to be. I was heavily focused on my legal career at that time, busy, traveling across the country, talking to various governments on various issues. Scott was a firefighter and worked 7 24-hour shifts in a 4-week period. So he had a much more balanced lifestyle than I did and had more time to take up some avocations, including diving. So we had a very companionate relationship, but a very distinct relationship with each other. But it just sort of worked. I would help him carry his dive and camera and computer equipment on vacation. I would edit his articles. He would show up at industry conferences and wear a name tag that said Mr. Jodi Skeates, because nobody knew who he was in my world and nobody knew who I was in his world. So we just sort of worked and had a relatively happy 6-year marriage.
It sounds like there's a lot of talk about scuba diving, and I take it that that's something that Scott loved to do. What did he enjoy about it?
I think there were 2 aspects to Scott's love of diving. First is that he was a marine historian and he loved to solve a mystery. So as he would pay attention to documentaries and primary resources, he would find something interesting about a shipwreck and he would want to go and explore it or tell the full story or bring images of that ship underwater to life to people that wouldn't be able to see those visuals otherwise. A lot of time he dove shipwrecks, but then a lot of time he also just dove for the marine life. He was an ocean activist and environmentalist. He would get fascinated by topics such as lionfish and how they had moved from the Pacific Ocean into the Atlantic Ocean. And he wanted to go photograph lionfish and raise awareness about, how the reefs were being impacted as the result of this ecological change. So it was sort of two things. One was history and one was environmentalism.
Scuba diving can be dangerous. I don't know if I really actually turned my mind to it enough. Did you ever talk to Scott about the possibility of an accident?
Nope. I was blissfully naive. We never spoke about the risky nature of his diving. Scott wasn't just a scuba diver. He was a technical trimix diver. He used a rebreather apparatus, which would take your exhaled CO2 and through a closed circuit, scrub out the carbon and reoxygenate it. And apparently that is highly risky equipment to be using. I didn't pay much attention to that. For the most part, he always thought the stress of my job was going to kill me by heart attack, and that taking me away on a beach vacation while he dove was a good thing for me.
Right.
We never once spoke about the fact that this would be risky enough that he could actually die from doing it. And we never once spoke about what would happen if he passed away before me.
Well, with a bit of context behind us, can you tell us what happened in 2017?
Sure. So in 2017, Scott and a group of divers from Ohio traveled up to a location in northwestern Ontario called Rossport. And if you look at a map, it's at the very tippy top of Lake Superior. It's a little tiny town, 65 total population, just 65 people, one cute little inn, one cute little restaurant. And one of the things the town was known for was a train wreck that had occurred in 1920. It had been traveling on a sheer rock face, and there was a landslide, and it smashed into the rocks, and it fell like down this 60-foot sheer rock wall into Lake Superior, and I guess it, rested down around 300 feet. Nobody had been able to find it for the longest time. In 2016, there was a diver named Terry Irvin, and he and his team located the locomotive. So the following year, Scott and his team were going to hopefully be the first divers to take digital images of the locomotive and the cars and the other parts of the train that were still underwater. They did not make it to that site. They went out the first day of about a week-long expedition just to test out their equipment. Scott was the second or third diver in the water. And from what I'm told, he swam to the side of the boat and complained that he was having difficulty breathing. The gentleman that assisted him at the side of the boat did something to his apparatus. Instead of aborting the dive, he let Scott go back out into the water. And within a few minutes, the other divers that had not entered the water looked over and saw that he was floating upside down. They call it flippers up. There was a quick rescue mission to pull him out of the water. Now you have to remember he was not a small man, and the apparatus was quite heavy too. And there was no Coast Guard assistance, and the men were all just trying to do what they could to pull Scott out of the water and get him into the boat. But he had probably been unconscious underwater without oxygen, having inhaled quite a lot of CO2 for probably at least 20 minutes. And so he was blue and cyanotic when he came out. The story gets even worse because they were out 45 minutes in a boat in the water. They couldn't get the Coast Guard. They brought him ashore. They had to wait another 45 minutes for an ambulance to attend very remote parts of Ontario we were in. And because there was no hospital around, they took him to an urgent care center. They had the intensive care physician in Thunder Bay assess Scott over video and try to figure out what was going on. I was a 45-minute drive away without cell phone service and without a landline in my hotel room. So I had to go to the local restaurant and wait for the OPP to call me so I could visually identify my unconscious husband. That just started a crazy, chaotic journey. A lot happened to get Scott medical care, but it was actually what happened after that that was the traumatic event for me. From what I understand, my husband would have breathed 2 or 3 breaths of CO2 and been confused, but by 5 breaths, he would have been unconscious, and it would have been very gentle, and there would be no pain. He would have just gone unconscious underwater doing something he loved.
We've been talking about Scott, and you've been telling us about his experience. If we turn to yours, what were some of the feelings and thoughts that you were experiencing initially?
It's interesting when I think back, because of course, when you get a knock on the door and somebody says there's been an accident, the police need to speak to you, there's instant action and shock. And I did have to go to the local restaurant and take a call from the OPP so I could identify Scott, as he had no ID or even clothing on him. But went back to where I was staying, and I had to wait for the OPP to pick me up because, of course, Scott had the vehicle 45 minutes away where he started the dive. So I was stranded. And as I waited there, I would honestly say, John, I had this knowing deep in my bones that he was not going to live. I had accepted that from the outset. I knew there would be a lot that I was going to have to do. And I sat very quietly outside of the inn, and I did some yogic breathing that I had been taught by a dear friend, my yoga instructor. And I did some mental energy centering and physical energy centering and cocooning. And I just breathed and told myself that the biggest challenge of my life was ahead of me, and I had to have all my senses available to me. I think as lawyers, sometimes we know when we need to put all of our personal emotions behind us and just focus on a task at hand. And I very much felt like I was going to have to be Scott's advocate, although not a legal advocate, but his personal advocate for this next stage. So I was pretty calm and accepting, except when the OPP came to pick me up. And through no fault of their own, just through their training, they started to build some false hope in me and tell me things like, oh, you shouldn't think that way. I'm sure he'll be fine. Wait until you talk to the doctors. And I went on this journey where they took me from Rossport to Thunder Bay, and I would go from one OPP car to another, from another OP car to a third, to a fourth. And I was just sort of shuttled along the highway, lights and sirens, trying to talk to the doctor. There was self-service intermittently as you would go around some of the towns, try to figure out what was happening. And I think I started to go back into shock again. But what happened was we almost got to Thunder Bay, and the orange ambulance redirected the flight from Thunder Bay to Sudbury, which I think is about a 9-hour drive. So I'd already gone 2 hours west. And then I realized we were going to have to drive back through Rossport, drive back, get all the way to Sudbury so I could receive Scott at the ambulance. Ultimately, went back to Rossport where the other divers were back, and I was able to ask them a few questions about what had happened. All my stuff was there. I hadn't packed. My dog was there. I had no idea what I was facing. The OPP started driving me towards Sudbury, and we stopped to get gas. And while we were stopped, Orange Ambulance came over the radio and said that they were redirecting the ambulance back to Thunder Bay again. So I would have already been there.
Oh my goodness.
But for the fact that the ambulance kept getting redirected. And I had asked a friend to drive up to Sudbury to be there to meet Scott. He was already in Sudbury. I had to call him back so he could go to Toronto. Then I ended up back in Thunder Bay. It took me 9 hours between the knock on the door to get to Scott's bedside. 9 hours, and it should have been a 45-minute drive.
And what happened at 9 hours? Was he still hanging on?
I was in a coma. So he had a brain injury, but nobody knew that at the time. They had been treating him as if he'd had a stroke or a heart attack. They were waiting for various tests to happen in the morning. He was comfortable. He was kind of having constant seizure activity, but they were able to manage that through medication. So he was very stable when I got to him. He looked like he was sound asleep. But he had had a brain injury. He was otherwise healthy. His lung his heart, they were all healthy. He wasn't really using life support. He was just in a coma in a hospital room and couldn't tell us what happened. And as I described earlier, I couldn't really tell people what happened either, because I probably should have paid more attention to Scott when he was telling me the various types of apparatus and gases and depths and things that he was doing in his diving career. I simply didn't know what to tell the doctors. The next morning, I was able to call his dive instructor in Cayman and get a little bit more information about what gases he would have been using. And I was able to meet with the neurologist and explain what happened, or what we thought had happened. And so they started treating him for a brain injury, but at that point it was too late. If you have a diving related injury, you should be taken by land to a hyperbaric chamber and kept under pressure until gases are absorbed into your body at an appropriate pressure. I'm sure I'm not stating that properly. There are other more technical people that could explain that better than me. But the worst thing you can do is put somebody in an airplane and take them at altitude. And they had done that a variety of times with Scott. So by the time we figured out what was happening, the damage to his brain had already been done, and there wasn't much of a chance to help him recover. Once the stats started changing from 50-50 to 80-20, and then I heard the stat 20% chance of survival, 0% chance of meaningful life, I was asked to make a decision about terminating life support and donating his organs. And at that time, I felt it really important to bring him back to Burlington because his mother needed to see him. His mother had Alzheimer's, and I felt the need for her to be able to say goodbye to him. So I had started the organ donation process and the repatriation process to get him back to Burlington. But for a whole bunch of reasons, that took us from Friday morning until Monday morning. So I was just up in Thunder Bay completely on my own with my unconscious husband, dealing with the fact that he was going to be dying at some point the following week. And then it even got more complicated than that, John. With organ donation, there's a recipient, and that recipient gets a call and has to get his or her life put in order because all of a sudden they're going to receive much wanted organs. So, at a drop of a hat, they need to be available to have some surgery that's going to affect their life through a lengthy recovery. So the day of the scheduled organ donation got delayed and delayed and delayed. So it took 9 days before Scott actually passed away from the date of the accident to his date of death. And those were the most traumatic days of my life.
We'll talk more about Camp Widow Toronto and Soaring Spirits Canada in our second interview. And these organizations provide tools and practical resources to widowed people. And I also appreciate that everyone's experience is different. But having said that, were there things that you then went through after Scott's death that you hear that many other widowed people experience?
The first thing I remember after the funeral was needing to talk to other widowed people. I was 47 years old. I wasn't supposed to be a widow. I needed a community. I reached out to everybody I knew who had lost their life partner. And talking to those people actually reassured me that I was going to get through this period of grief. And it's really through my attendance at Camp Widow in 2019 that I found that community of people where it doesn't matter how long it's been or the cause of death or whether it was a traumatic death or a complicated death. Everybody was going through a similar experience and that their life had been completely uprooted and the plans they had made with their person for the rest of their lives had ended and they needed to find themselves and grow again. I think that's consistent with every widowed person I've met since Scott died.
You said in your LinkedIn post that you returned to the place of Scott's accident 5 years later to scatter his ashes. And then you said you decided it was time to stop looking to others for guidance and instead to put on your own oxygen mask, that turning 53 isn't guaranteed for anyone. What did you mean by that?
Well, at the 5-year mark, I had just turned 52 and Scott was 52 when he passed away. I went back to Rossport because, remember, I had left all my belongings and the dog and everything at the inn, and a dear friend had come up and packed up the room and got the dog and brought everything home. I flew on the ambulance. I never went back to that space. And I felt I needed some closure. When I was there, the woman who ran the inn allowed me to go into the room that I had been in when the knock came on the door. I sort of had this weird, I can't explain it, this weird existential moment where I went back in time and thought about who I was at that moment right before there was a knock on the door, and how I had changed or failed to change since that time, that I had stopped breathing essentially, that I was just hanging on tight to try to get through. I had the funeral on Friday, John, and I went back to work on Monday. And I bragged about the fact that Manulife had such wonderful mental health benefits that I had used something like $5,000 or $6,000 in benefits over the next year, but I never missed a single day of work. And that might not have been the right story. That may have been a cry for help. I'm not sure. After I had attended Camp Widow, I realized that I had experienced trauma. It wasn't so much Scott's death that was traumatic. It was the trauma that happened to me. He slipped away gently after 5 breaths. I'd been holding on to my breath for 5 years, and I was throwing myself into work. I had all these hallmark symptoms of PTSD, hyperagitation, overwork, overcommitment, and all I was doing was working. And I think I was looking to work to sort of save me from what I was dealing with, but it wasn't. I was doing all these other things. And remember, COVID happened during this time too. So I was doing all these things that I wanted to do for myself outside of the work environment. And all those things I was doing, I had done some trap, neuter, release programs for some feral cats locally. I had gone to Kenya and helped build a school. I had done some advocacy for organ donation. I had helped to start this charity called Soaring Canada. All these things I were doing were really buoying me up and making me happy and making me feel like I had a purpose in life, but work wasn't. And as much as I didn't decide on that 5th anniversary to leave work, it made me realize that I just wasn't living my own life anymore. I was just living in grief of the life that I had lost when Scott died. And then I needed to make some changes because I needed to start taking care of myself.
Well, Jodi, I can't imagine the experience. I can't imagine my life changing so fast like that in an instant in such a way. And I really appreciate you coming on to talk to me and the listeners to share your experience. And next time we're going to talk about how you're now trying to use that experience to help other people and hopefully yourself. And I'm hoping that you get some more oxygen as you try and get yourself an oxygen mask now and start thinking more of what Jodi wants and needs. Our podcast is about wellness, and we explore many areas of wellness. And we have a question we ask every guest at the end of an interview. It's essentially a mini wellness check-in. Are you currently neglecting an area of wellness in your life? And if so, can you think of even one thing that you can do to foster wellness in that area?
It's a very interesting question because since I've left full-time work, I would say I have a much more balanced life. I'm healthier than I've ever been. I'm sleeping better. I'm eating better. My chronic stress is completely gone. But in the absence of having a scheduled Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job, I've lost those bumper guards around the weekends.
Right.
And I realized that I haven't taken a weekend off to just sit and read a book or play in my garden. I've allowed everything to blend in together. The weekends become the weekdays and the weekdays become the weekends. So thinking of a response to that, I think I need to sort of implement a weekly day of rest.
That's a great idea. Not just for people who are working part-time, but maybe people who are retired or just generally, because so many people these days, I love the way you said bumpers. Like we don't have those bumpers to protect certain days to allow us to get some rest. So I hope you find a way to do that. And I wish you good luck. And thanks again, Jodi, for your time in this interview.
Thank you.
I'm Cameron, and welcome to another installment of The Adventures of the Starving Artist. This past week, I had a really cool excuse to play tourist in my own town, which is something I haven't done. One of my best friends, whom I've talked about on the segment before, JC Anderson, great songwriter, incredible guitar player, The album he put out is called Blackout Poetry, if you want to check that out. But he and his fiancée Celia came up from Colorado to visit for the week. And so together we got to explore Ottawa. And like I said, I got to play tourist a little bit. It was really great. Got to see some new stuff. They checked out a few museums that I had seen before. And JC has this really cool knack for finding great places to eat. I've had the pleasure of traveling around much of the world with JC before, and he's really good at this. He'll just find somewhere on his phone that's got decent reviews, and sometimes it's right around the corner, sometimes it's a bit out of the way, but he always does a good job, and this time was no exception. One of the coolest spots we went to was about a half-hour drive from Ottawa proper. It was actually over on the Gatineau side, and the joke I like to make is, well, I've got to no reason not to. So we checked that out, had a beer over there, and that was really cool. And JC's been brushing up on his French for years, so he did really well over there. One of the other cool things we got to check out was the Lansdowne Farmers Market, today on their last day before they headed back home to the States. What a cool spot. There was a bunch of stuff happening that I didn't know was happening, beyond just the farmers market. It was the Indigenous Masters Games, and so we heard music and we thought, oh, let's go check that out. And it was a whole other part of the market that had opened up, and we were just checking out the different vendors and the different crafts. There were some traditional drums going, and it was just really cool experience that, like I said, we had no idea it was happening. It was just kind of luck that we stumbled upon it. It made for a really great afternoon. Seeing the city through that lens, that touristy lens, it's kind of fun. Gave me a bit of a renewed sense of respect for Ottawa and appreciation for it. One of the other cool things we did was we got to experience a tour of Parliament. And what was sweet about that was, since they're redoing the centre block to remove asbestos, they've moved the House of Commons to the West Block. And while I knew that on paper, I hadn't actually seen it, aside from on TV here and there, like, you know, the green chairs and the green carpets and stuff. But when we were in there, we learned that because they had to cut down some trees to make that happen, since it's sitting in what used to be a courtyard, the way that they've built the structure around it, it looks like the trees. So they have these light/support structures that branch out like tree branches. And it was a really cool space, just neat to stand in. We were even lucky enough to actually go down and stand on the green carpet on the floor. Of course, nothing was in session as it's summer right now, but still really cool to experience. All in all, it was a great week seeing Ottawa through the lens of someone who doesn't live here and checking it out in a way that I might not otherwise. So thanks to JC and Celia for helping me do that, and safe travels as you're flying back down to Colorado. That's all for now for me. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Cameron. This is The Starving Artist. Until next time.
We love our listeners and thanks for joining us. Please help spread the word about Let's Be Well Together podcast. Follow us and rate us on Spotify, Apple, Google, or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Instagram at lets.be.well.together and let your friends know about us.
Move that body like we're meant to do.
It's John and I'm talking to Sheila. Hey, Sheila.
Hi, John.
We are talking about articles last week, this week, next week. Which one do you want to talk about today, Sheila?
I would like to talk about diet culture.
Oh, yeah, I like that one. That's another one from, this one's CNN Health by Madeline Holcomb. It's March 21, 2022, so quite a while ago. You can kick diet culture out of your diet, experts say. Here's where to start. What I really liked about this is it kind of tells us what they are meaning by diet culture.
Yes, I agree. I like how they explain what diet culture is, and then how it's not just diet culture we don't just get from magazines or TVs or commercials. It's in everything in life. You get it at work, you'll get it at home or at the gym. It's interesting that it's all over.
Even though I don't love reading lots of stuff from the articles, I'd rather just talk, but can I read a few things just to kind of set the context?
Yeah.
When these experts say diet culture, they do not mean making choices with the health and well-being of your body and mind being the priority.
Mm-hmm.
What they mean by diet culture is comprised of the influences and messages that impact how we eat based on cultural pressure to attain an ideal body type. They say often messages from diet culture can sound a lot like healthy eating advice, but they're quite different. Advertisers and food producers and all these people and social media influencers, they look like, hey, I'm trying to help. They're not helping.
No. And I really like in the article how it says it takes the joyfulness out of eating, right? Like we need to make healthy eating a part of our life and be aware of your body and what your body needs, because everyone's an individual. We can't all kind of fit into a box. What you need is different than what I need.
Exactly. And on that point, again, to read a bit, it says every single body needs different amounts of food, different levels of activity, and different types of nourishment. Anything that tells you there is one right way for everyone is a diet culture trap.
Yeah.
The other thing it points out is diet culture leads some people to have eating disorders. But even if you're not somebody who has an eating disorder, you often can feel like you're the subject of shame and bullying, restriction, self-punishment, and a negative relationship with food.
Right.
So it's just incredible how diet culture can affect each of us.
Yeah. And that really bothers me because I think food can be so, that joyfulness of the smell and the look and in just enjoying what you eat. And it even says in this article, you shouldn't feel guilty about eating something that you know isn't healthy, because sometimes we want that or we have the opportunity to eat it, and you should feel that you're allowed to eat that. Just be aware.
Well, it's kind of funny because even the way you're saying it, you should feel like you're allowed to eat it. What they're saying is you shouldn't have to justify yourself.
Right. But like
there's a joyfulness in eating.
Yeah.
And you should just be able to experience it. And of course you have to eat healthy.
Yes.
But having said that, you can eat healthy and once in a while have an ice cream cone or a piece of cake or piece of pie.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I think makes it easy to kind of detect the diet culture is they talk about it focusing on appearance.
Yes.
It's not really focusing on what healthy eating is. It's focusing on how you should end up looking.
Right.
And so if you're seeing things that are focused on looks, well, is that really connected to, because you know what?
Yeah.
Just like we all need different foods, what's wrong with all of us looking different?
Yeah, exactly. We do. We should all look a little different.
What's wrong with some of us having different body shapes?
Yes, I agree.
Well, ultimately, what I really like about this article is if you see something that's talking about eating, try and really zero in on whether it's nutritional advice, whether it's something that you can use to have better nutrition and health in your life, as opposed to, and then try and see if it's more focused on what you should look like, what you should be like, whether you should buy food that they want you to buy. Chances are a lot of the stuff you're seeing is diet culture and not actually health and wellness advice. There's a thought. Popped up while running. Feeling pretty good about something recently. I was asked some months back to talk about the wellness journey I've been on for the last few years, which is crazy now. It's 7 years or more. And the book that I wrote and the podcast to a Rotary Club. And so I put together a PowerPoint and did this presentation, and it was a really good feeling. And some people were saying how it was really cool because they were starting to look at things in a way they haven't looked at it before. And what's really neat now is I've been asked to do that presentation to my local law associations. So lawyers I know in the community, I'm going to be able to share my story with them. And with any luck, somebody's going to participate in that and have a look at their own lives and start making some positive changes. Just a really good feeling. What's also kind of neat is it means I'm back to updating and developing and finessing the PowerPoint that I'm working on. I'm pretty sure that as I do a few more of these, it'll get cleaner and better. With the dream being that I'll be part of this group of people right now who are sharing stories, sharing setbacks and successes, things that worked, things that didn't work, but at least starting to talk about more generally about wellness and how we need to focus on it and giving examples of how we got through it, which might help other people. It's me. Am I?
Yeah. Just let me say, flip side of the coin.
Hey, John, do you have any quotes for me today?
I've got quotes. I've always got quotes.
Always got quotes. There should be a section here for quotes. Just the quote of the day.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
When I was president of Rotary, we had meetings every week, and I always ended the meeting with a quote of the day
Oh, okay.
from my quote list.
Oh, cool.
Okay, let me throw this one at you.
Okay.
It's by psychiatrist Carl Jung.
Okay.
So he's kind of famous because a lot of times people talk about Freud and Carl Jung.
Mm-hmm.
Know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, just be another human soul. What do you got with that?
Well, at first I was kind of like, wait, what? Know all the theories? Like you want us to know, but I guessed when you're a person talking to a person, just be a person.
Exactly.
Don't analyze everything or...
There's a time and place for theories and there's a time and place for technique.
Yeah.
But there's also a time and place where you're just one person with another person.
Yeah. And that's good.
I don't really want to zero in on what exactly it means. I think it can mean different things to different people.
True.
And it can mean different things for me at different times in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I do take from this, from our kind of discussions, we often talk about active listening.
Yes.
And that's, for whatever reason, that's what's jumping in my mind today. That when I'm with someone else, I'm not there because I'm a consultant. I'm not there because they want me to tell them what they need.
Or help them.
They just want to be with me. I think my default there is to try and be an active listener, listen, talk about my experiences.
Sometimes people just need to share. Yeah, they don't need a result or there isn't a solution. They just need to maybe vent or share and go from there.
And I like this concept of soul. Being a philosophy student and someone who's spiritual but not necessarily religious, it's a really tricky one. What is the soul?
That is.
You know?
What is it? Where is it?
But I do think that that's kind of one of the things about being spiritual, even without religion, this connectedness to others, that there's more than just ourselves. That's partially inside too, right? There is this soul and you can feel that connectedness with that person.
You can definitely feel it.
Yeah.
That connectiveness. Either you can, like when someone's coming, you can feel that warm, or you get those feelings, that eerie feeling like someone's behind you. I mean, there's something to it. There's definitely a connectiveness.
So one of the other
with
things
all
that
people
jumps out at me when today, when I'm looking at a quote, something will be different tomorrow.
Yeah.
But today it's that connectedness. Like we had interviewed Reverend Jessica Purple Rodello, who's an atheist minister, right?
I do remember that.
And she made a great example, which is you walk into a room and you can tell something happened.
Yes.
You know, sometimes it's something hilarious. Sometimes it's something bad.
Yeah.
But you can feel it. And what's jumping out at me at the quote today is sometimes when I'm with another person, I should just try and feel that connectedness and what is it that I'm feeling is coming from them.
What energy am I feeling coming from them? And depending on their mood and your mood, it'll be different every time.
Yeah. So let myself feel my energy too.
Yeah. That is really great because I definitely remember that interview and I remember her saying that when you walk into a room and someone's arguing and something's happened, or a warmth, there's a laughter, there's a comfort, you know, you feel that too. Or even an awkwardness, like you walked into something that was intimate that was going on and you're like, ooh, you know, that is all in the air. Like, it's not like anyone's talking about it. I definitely felt that quite often.
I've been interviewing comedians as part of this because, you know, I really enjoy comedy, stand-up comedy. I love interviewing comedians. And they often talk about how they can feel when they're connected to the audience.
Yeah.
It's very visceral. Like they know.
Yes, I can feel that too. When we're dancing on stage, we often talk about the audience. Oh, the audience is really live today, or I'm not feeling the energy. I'm not getting it from the audience. And yes, you definitely get that. And it's interesting because they're just there, right? The audience is there. You're looking at eyes, and when you're on stage, sometimes you don't even see them, but you can feel their energy. So I'm sure it's not just comedians.
Well, I love a quote that makes me think.
Yeah.
I love a quote that makes me think different things at different times. So thank you, Carl Jung, for know all the theories, master all the techniques, But as you touch a human soul, just be another human soul. Please remember that we're not providing advice. We hope to inspire you to work towards balance, and we urge you to consult with qualified people if you need advice. The people on the show are speaking in their personal capacities. Their views expressed are their own, and don't represent the views or opinions of their outside contacts, their employers, or anyone else. We try to get things right, but we can't guarantee everything we say is correct, or that the things we talk about will work for you. Let's be well together, and let's be sure to do that in a safe way. That's a wrap on another episode, and it is sign-off time. I'm here with Sheila and Elise.
Hi.
Hello.
The big thing I did last week has to do with what we call the opening of the courts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the courts don't actually close. There's hearings all year round. But a long time ago, you would only have hearing dates at certain times of the year, and September was one of those times where basically they called it the opening of the court. So we still do the ceremony even though it's not technically opening.
Mm-hmm.
And what's great about that, where I live in Waterloo Region, is we have a really great bar, and we have judges who come out and talk to us and let us know what's happening with the courts and let us know what we can do to help them do their jobs. It was really nice. It was arranged by our law librarians, Pia and Sarah, so thank you for that. And I had some really great chats with other local lawyers and even with a couple judges. So that was pretty cool. How about you, Sheila?
Oh, I had a great week. I worked a lot and I did 2 weddings on the weekend. So yeah, I worked Friday wedding and Saturday wedding. So that was busy, but we did have an interesting conversation with some people who came over. So John's mom, some family friends were coming into town and they wanted to come see us, which we were a little surprised about because we don't know them too well, but they came over and they were really interested in our lives and all this. And then I found out that they read our book. Our book. They read John's book. So they were asking questions all about it and asking about our house and our life. And it was really fun. I found that really interesting. So that was just something that happened this week. This week coming up, we have a wedding. So in Niagara-on-the-Lake, I'm very excited about that. And also John is running his half marathon.
That's true. I didn't mention that, but I have to actually do that. It's a 5K run and then a half marathon.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm going to find out whether I can do it in a few days.
Yeah, so we're going to Ottawa for that this weekend. So that's what's happening with us. What about you, Elise? We'll leave the best for last.
Yeah, I guess maybe.
Well, you probably have the most exciting stuff.
Yeah, I did have a pretty eventful week because it was the first week back to school teaching kindergarten.
Yes.
It was pretty smooth,
Good.
which was nice. I had a lot of the same students I had last year, so they settled into the routine really nicely, but I was exhausted. It's a lot of energy. The kids are nervous. The kids are excited. And so there's a lot of energy that you have to put out to kind of just balance it all out. I think I slept probably 10 hours on Friday. So I had some good rest time on the weekend, which was great. And it was really nice to be back in a routine. I think I thrive on routine. So it's really nice to have my daily routine, which I'm really excited about. Looking forward to this week, just continuing with that routine. And I'm hoping to bike to work a few more times than I did last week. I know it was quite warm last week and then rainy. So I'm hoping this week is a better bike week for me.
How is your pottery class?
Great. Yeah. I started a hand building pottery class as well. So that's 2 evenings a week. And we've been working on building a butter dish. So that's been fun. Everything's by hand. So you roll out the clay, you put it together, you have to measure it all out with a little template. So that's been a lot of fun. I think I've been learning new skills surrounding pottery.
Very good.
And then you kind of just like pinch, pinch, pinch and brush, brush, brush with your hand. So it is quite relaxing. After being at school all day, you kind of go in and you can just really be focused on what you're doing, which is great. That's all I've got.
Well, half of me thinks you were kind of trying to sell yourself something there, Elise, saying that you like really like your habits and routine. And I hope you believe it. And as long as you do, that works. And that's it for us this week. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the episode and we'll see you again next week.
That is it for today's show. Please try and make wellness a priority.
You deserve it.
If you feel the need to talk to someone or ask for help, please do that.
Accept yourself for the person you are.
So long.
Adieu.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.